All right, everybody, welcome here. We are in Buffalo Grove, Illinois at Nerd Rage Gaming. We are proud to bring you our championship. It's going to be awesome. We got 24 players qualified. Just kind of a brief summary of the series overall. We had over 1,400 entries on the year from players from 8 different states, which is kind of crazy. We traveled the Midwest mostly. And then on top of that, we played Modern 5 times. We played Legacy 4 times, Standard once, and then we had 2 team tournaments, which led us to qualifying all 24 players here. We have Matt Hoey, who's our defending champion, is also going to be here today. So, Joe, I know for you, we're playing Standard, Legacy, and Modern today. You have experience with a multi-constructed format. Is there any useful tips you have for the guys playing today?
Well, it's not so much about the formats, it's about the structure of the event, I feel like. This is something that players in general are not going to be used to, a small elite field where all your matches matter. You can't, if you lose a couple, you can't make up for it later on by going on a winning streak because you've already lost those
Sure.
matches are gone. And we're playing, instead of playing against a whole field, you're playing against the people in your pod. So the results from the rest of them don't really matter. And it's unique in that winning your pod matters, what record you win with doesn't.
Right.
So it's really how things play out and develop in your pod is all that really matters on the first day.
Sure. Is there any weird metagame considerations you have to make?
Well, there's some aspect where if you feel like several players in the field are going to play one specific deck, let's say it's the best deck, you may want to structure your deck, your sideboard to overweight on that.
Okay.
Because we're looking at in a field of, here we have a field of 24 players. If 5 people are playing a deck, that's 20% of the tournament. That's a tremendous number.
Yeah.
And maybe your pod, you might end up with 3 of them in your pod, in which case over half of your opponents are playing the same deck.
Yeah.
So really, the more popular decks in the field, I think you really focus on, and some of the rogue strategies that are maybe in a normal, you might expect 2 or 3% of the field, you just probably ignore completely.
Cool. So with that, the winner of the tournament over this weekend, so we're playing, it's our pod play is on Saturday, and then our top 8 is on Sunday. So the winner of the tournament wins a qualification to this tournament again next year. And then alongside next year, so we did $2,000 prize pool this year for the Nerd Rage series. Next year we're going all into $5,000 prize pools, which is double and a half of the prize structure, which is awesome for the players.
It's a big jump.
Going back to Iowa, going back to Wisconsin, and then second half of the year, kind of still up in the air. We're going to figure out maybe some more places. Maybe we expand once we get a little bit bigger here. So kind of leading into the tournament, let's start with the first format is Standard. The Standard metagame, this is one of the best Standard formats I can ever remember.
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't been playing too long. I've been playing kind of tail end of Theros, but there's at least a handful of decks that are viable today to be playing in Standard, I think. Our tournament is kind of dominated by Golgari, which makes sense. Is it Drake's deck, and then Jeskai. For Brad, what about you? If you had to play this today, what are you playing in Standard?
I would be playing probably a rogue deck that would be very unpopular, but I'd probably be playing some type of Grixis mid-ranged, focusing on Nicol Bolas and Niv Mizzet, maybe Doom Whisper, depending on what you think the meta is looking like. I would have expected a lot of Golgari, so Doom Whisper I think is actually better against those matchups than Niv Mizzet is on average, mostly just because it can trade with the Carnage Tyrant. But the mid-range deck really preys on the Golgari decks, the Grixis deck, but it's really weak to the control decks.
Sure.
Especially in game 1. So that would have been my choice. I'm not sure it would have been the best choice, but I don't think many people would have been prepared for it or expected it. And I think I kind of would have come in with a little bit of a rogue strategy there.
Okay. You guys got any strong opinions on what you would play if you had to show up today as far as Standard goes?
Standard's really interesting now because, in my opinion, we have very clear 3 tier 1s, but then a lot of tier 2s that are very close behind tier 1, in my opinion. And that kind of shows here in this field. We have those 3 tier 1 decks, and then a handful of these tier 2s that I think are very strong contenders. I know I'd be playing Jeskai in some variant because I like those kinds of cards, but it's hard to say what's actually going to be best depending on each pod, right?
Okay. Joe, I know we kind of looked at the players here in each pod. If you had to pick one player that can perform the best, maybe it's not about deck selection, but maybe just even comfortability with the format or something like that, who do you have as the best performer?
Well, I think I would actually here go with, like I referenced before, the player who's playing something that's rogue or very fringe. It's not going to be something that people are going to be prepared for. So I'm actually going to go with one of the players who's playing a unique deck. So I'm going to go with Tommy Tomsevich
Cool.
as doing well in standard, because it's unlikely anyone is metagaming even a little bit for what he brought.
Yeah, I think that's kind of a cool consideration is if you don't think players, or if you think players are over metagaming for specific decks, you just show up with something no one's prepared for.
Right, and not just the metagame aspect of it, but how many players in this field have ever played against it, or more than one game?
You know what
it's
to
not
expect.
You're not something you're focusing on. You might not understand all the lines of play that Tommy has available to him. You don't know what sideboard cards he can play, because this deck just really has a nice toolbox to it. So
Yeah.
I really agree with you. I think Tommy's deck's a great choice.
Cool, so moving along, we're playing Modern, obviously probably the most popular format in Magic, I think, currently.
Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's not one or two decks, there's just a million decks in Modern that are like playable, essentially. Today we got pretty dominated by Jeskai Control and Bant Spirits. I don't know that I'm surprised based on what we've seen previously throughout the year, and just how much Bant Spirits has really picked up in popularity amongst the players as Humans has gone down, so the tribal deck of choice kind of nowadays is the Bant Spirits deck. Dakota, what do you think you'd play today? Knowing that a lot of players gravitate typically towards the same strategies in the room, so.
It's interesting, right? Where in this kind of tournament, you want to try to be unique and come out with something new, something fresh, something unexpected. But I think I would personally just stick to what I know. That's something with Snapcaster Mage. It's not always the best thing to be doing in Modern, but it's something that I know. That's what I would try to be doing. At the same time, I might be trying to deviate a little bit with the unexpected variants that have some powerful, plan Bs, like a Through the Breach, a Madcap Experiment, perhaps. That way you can have those backdoor wins when your back's up against the wall. That's where I tend to go towards in Modern. I don't think that this type of exclusive tournament structure would change my decision entirely, but it's pretty close for me, Zach.
Cool, yeah, I talked to Brad earlier in the day, and I said, man, I don't know, if I probably was going to play a tournament, I might play something like Super Glass Cannon in Modern. I mentioned Grishelbrand was a deck I would entertain. I don't think a lot of people play a ton of Graveyard Hate for these, because not a lot of the guys in the room have played Dredge throughout the year, so that's not a deck I expect someone to just pick up ice cold and start playing for a tournament that means so much like this. So I think that's a deck I would play. I don't know, do you have a player that you like as far as this format goes?
Yeah, I mean, just talking about Dredge, I think my problem with showing up with a deck like Dredge is that I think everyone's going to have it kind of top of mind. It's a deck that is very easy to hate out, and I think, looking at these sideboards, we see that, and I think people smartly decided to leave Dredge at home today.
Okay.
In terms of a deck, though, I definitely like KCI still.
Yeah. Speaking of not easy to hate out, KCI is one of those you have to have part A, part B, part C, and you have to be aggressive at the same time.
Yeah, I agree with you. Dakota, you were going to say something?
Matt, what you were saying about the prevalence or expectancy of the Dredge in Modern, for example, that reminds me of the decisions that I remember Peter Trego was making last year. In last year's championship for Legacy, he was very short on sideboard slots, he felt. And he's staring at our spreadsheet of the expected metagame for Legacy, and he just realizes, I think I can just cut my ley line of the Void and be okay. And that opened up 4 sideboard slots, and in this kind of a field, those kinds of, extreme decisions can pay off.
Sure.
If it works out for you.
Sure. So now we're going to kind of move to Joe's bread and butter here for the Legacy metagame. Again, there's probably a handful of decks. It's probably the least diverse of the formats, if I had to describe it. I feel like Grixis Control is probably just the de facto tier 1 deck. There's a bunch of middling decks, whether it's Blackwood Reanimator, whether it's Death and Taxes, some sort of Stoneblade decks. We kind of see that in our metagame again here. There's a bunch of Grixis Control, obviously. We've seen a bunch of players play out throughout the year to great success. You see it amongst Grand Prix and Star City events and things like that also. If you had a deck to play, Joe, what are you playing?
Well,
I'm expecting big things, by the way.
I mean,
I'm expecting
How many answers?
I only go one way
Yeah.
in Legacy. Even though I've had experience with some of the field, I always gravitate towards my legendary creatures, my packaged Vencers, just because it's against a smattering of different decks, we can find things with generally useful. Like creatures that come into play and trigger and do something is valuable. And I think that still holds true against like Grixis Control, Miracles, probably the two most popular decks in Legacy right now. They're great at killing things. And so I would be hesitant to play, I'm hesitant to play creatures that they can come into play and die and not generate any value for you.
Okay.
It's even more so than the value, it's just you're spending your mana for the turn and you're not developing, nothing's happening. So I would probably run the same stuff I always run.
Yep.
And that's also, I kind of learned my lesson in the first SCG Players Championship. I deviated, I went outside of what I was used to.
Yep.
I worked on a new deck and I brought it and I did okay. But the other 2 years when I went and played my typical normal deck that everyone knew I was going to play, I did better.
Yeah.
So I do think having something unique, having something fringe is nice. Having something you're experienced with and you know all the interactions, particularly in Legacy, I think is just more valuable. So that's what I would do.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said about that. I know we continuously talk about metagaming for a small tournament like this. People know you're going to show up with Miracles most of the time, right? If we had to guess, you'd show up with Miracles. Does it really matter?
It doesn't it depends on whether your deck is popular or not also.
Sure.
Like if everyone knows that you're going to come with Dredge, but they don't expect anyone else to,
Yeah.
then even if they know that, they still can't metagame against you because if the Dredge player is in a different pod, then you have your sideboard or your main deck hate that's of no value
Yeah,
to you.
that's a great
so
point.
you really can't, even if it's, I mean, you could post on the message board for the tournament, you're like, I'm playing this. And if you're the only one playing it, they can't do anything about it.
Yeah.
That reminds me
That's
of Reed Splett in Modern, actually. He's just 100% known for playing Titan Shift, but he's not going to deviate because he knows he's like the only player in the field. No one's going to metagame for that one player on that deck.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I think it's kind of overshadowed. People trying to metagame in small tournaments, and they talk themselves out of what got them there, you know? So,
Right.
and I think you just got to like stick to your guns at some point, unless something really drastic is to happen where your deck that's not played as much, like you talked about the splits, if that deck somehow becomes super popular, maybe you switch off. But at this point, what's the real point? So,
In Joe's case, it helped that Miracles was just still like the best deck anyway.
yeah, yeah, that's true.
Well, and even if they do decide to hate against it, right? Like there's still the odds that they just don't play you in that format.
Absolutely.
So the odds to just play someone against a specific deck that you're trying to metagame against are actually really, really low.
Yeah, that's also true. So we've talked about favorite players for each format. Dakota, I know a lot of people here in the Chicagoland area, we always sell out our legacy ones, 100 plus players in the room.
For sure.
So there's a lot of guys with really good legacy chops here. Do you have anyone you think is going to perform the best today?
It's so hard for me to just not go for my friend Peter Tragos, the only Storm player in the room. But Matthew Hoey is a man that's lethal with a brainstorm. I don't feel like very special just calling out the best player in the room, but
Sure.
Matthew Hoey, he knows how to cast some legacy cards. Storm, the only archetype in the room of its kind, can do some interesting things if you're not prepared for it. I have to go with Matthew Hoey on legacy.
Okay, cool. So just kind of bring up the players here, and we'll look at over the whole pods here. So give you a brief overview of kind of what it all looks like. Now, one of the unique factors of this tournament is Matt Hoey was the MVP, which is our most valuable player. He had the most points at the end of the year here.
110?
110 points.
110.
First to break
That's
100.
insane.
That's nuts. Yeah. I think he actually won by like almost 20 points or something. Like almost an entire event. He was
Sure, right.
past the second person.
Like
second
winning
player.
an entire.
I was
Right.
Yeah.
scrolling through our top 8 album that Max had posted, and he was in like every other picture, it seemed.
Oh yeah, yeah. So anyways, with that said, Matt earned the right as the MVP to make one swap. So we drew the pods A through D, and Matt got some time to look at the pods, 1 hour, and got to make one switch, whether it was moving himself somewhere, swapping with another player, or swapping 2 players, which is the decision he came to actually. You can see Joe Bernal is in pod A now, where Mac Endress was in that spot previously. So Matt opted to switch Joe out of his pod and put Mac into his pod. So there's a little bit of strategy to that kind of thing. We talked about it kind of exhaustively after we saw the original pods. We said, what's going to happen? So Brad, do you like the move, or what do you think about the move Matt did?
So it was I want to talk a little bit about what we thought. So Matt had an hour to make his decision. That's what we agreed on.
Right.
So in the moment we sent him the information, we said, "What's Matt going to do?" And Matt and I were talking. We're like, we think he's going to move either himself into Pod B or someone out of his group into maybe Pod B or Pod A, and that is what actually happened. So he did snabbed Mackenzie Endress out of Pod A. And moving Joe, and I think that's smart. Like, Joe Bernal is a very good player, especially in Legacy. Matt, Andrew, and Joe are all sponsored by Hot Sauce Games, and they continue to show up to our series and support us, and that's great. But they're all teammates. They're all working together on this event. I guarantee it. So splitting each other up makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, if you want your team to show a little bit of dominance, maybe split them up and things like that.
So level 1 of making that swap always, kind of obviously seems like I'll put myself in a weak pod, or I'll take some strong player out of my pod.
Yep.
Speaking with Hoey a little bit on the sidelines, he had mentioned, because of what you said, them being on a team, his number one priority was to separate himself and his teammates, and whatever he can do to make the strength of the pod change is kind of a back burner idea. So in this case, he was able to do both things, which was great.
So I don't know if this is true, but if you talk to Matt, did you ask him? Did he consult with Joe? Did he say, Joe, where do you want to go?
Oh, all three of them were in a group chat looking at the spreadsheet, and he basically said, "All right, Joe, where are you going?" And interestingly, Joe said he wanted to be in Pod A rather. It was close between Pod A and B, Pod 1 and 2. He said Pod 2 had more variance to it.
Sure.
Based on the deck selection, in his opinion. So Joe opted to be into Pod A.
Interesting thoughts. So kind of with that, we'll go over each pod real quick, and so you guys can see the graphic obviously there. We'll show it throughout the day a bunch. There's a lot going on, 24 players, how they're split up and things like that, but I really want to get to the nitty-gritty and who's going to win each pod. So in Pod A, I know we've talked about Joe Bernal getting moved there.
Yeah.
Is he the clear-cut winner in that pod now, Brett?
I don't think so. I got to go with Steve Locke.
Wow, surprise.
I love my Iowa Magic guy. No, really, it's just the history. Steve really kind of taught me a lot growing up in my Magic career. The Iowa crowd has been very helpful for me. He's got a GP win under his belt, 15 rounds, no losses, no buys. And he's going back. He's been in the Pro Tour like the last 3 or 4 times. I know he just won his RPTQ with the deck he's choosing to play in Modern.
Yep.
So I just feel like he's a very strong, tight player, can keep up with all of the high-level players that we see on the tour regularly, and he would be my favorite for Pod A.
Cool. Who you guys got for Pod A?
I was just saying that Pod A is extremely strong. I think it's our strongest pod overall. We have multiple CT winners in this pod. Actually, I think every player in this pod has won a CT at some point. Maybe not this year, but actually, yeah, everyone this year. Wow.
Yeah.
So this is a very, very, very strong pod. As we may have mentioned earlier, our stage 1 for today is going to be 2 rounds of Legacy, 2 rounds of Modern, followed by 1 round of Standard. That can come into play a little bit, but I'm a big fan of Tommy's Chromatic Black deck, as Joe mentioned. It's going to be the final deciding round of stage 1. Hopefully that one can clinch it. Jose Munoz on Boggles also could do some pretty insane things in this pod.
Cool.
For myself, based on experience and success, like in outside events, I would have to go with Bernal, but I'm definitely rooting for Tommy.
Okay.
I feel like he's one of the 2 players playing unique decks for the field in all 3 formats, and I'm excited to see how that goes for him.
Okay, cool. Well, I'm going to go with Jonathan Hobbs. I know it was kind of a surprise, as you and I talked about it kind of briefly last night. I really like his deck selection. He showed us a bunch at the Modern CT that he won. You don't see him a bunch at our events, but I watched him play and I was like, wow, this guy is like.
Yeah, he was cruising. At the Lafayette, Indiana one, right?
Yes.
So just another new player we picked up from traveling to other states, and I remember watching him and thinking really tight play, really smart decision making. Really liked his lines. So I agree with you. He's pretty strong.
I'm going to go another way. I'm going to say that your pick to win the pod is going to lose the first 2 rounds of the tournament.
Unbelievable.
Yes,
Unbelievable. All right, sounds good.
Rosy Post can't hack it.
That's pretty good. So moving into Pod B here. Now this one is one I'm super in the air about. Joe, I know you and I talked about a bunch. Do you have any strong consideration here?
Well, again, I'm not as knowledgeable about the players as you three are. I'm going to go with the player in this pod that I've seen the most in outside events. Occasionally, I see Justin Brickman at Grand Prix or Star City events, not perhaps enjoying a tremendous level of success at that level, but even so, he's out there, he's gaining experience,
Sure.
he's just logging matches, and as your Magic career goes on, the more matches you played, and more, even if it doesn't directly affect the matches he's playing this weekend, it's just overall experience, and I think that matters.
I agree, and he's not one to shy away from competition. He's played in two of our previous championships, and he's always floating around the top tables. He obviously has a lot of legacy chops. He actually, I believe they top-aided a team tournament. Him and the Split brothers top-aided a Star City.
I think top 16.
Top 16, sorry.
Yeah.
Was pretty close. So those guys obviously got some chops. Dakota, who do you like in Pod B?
I'd honestly go with Brickman.
Okay.
The repetition, how much Magic he's playing is pretty important. We have really, really strong players in here. James Bush, excellent player, been on the Pro Tour. Scotty Mayer, a lot of success in the past few years, but this year specifically, those players have not been playing as much Magic as everyone else in this pod, and
Yeah.
I think it might come back to bite them.
All right, are you sticking with Brickman, or are you going somewhere else? Bro?
I'm not. I'm on James Bush. I think his deck selection in all three formats is going to get him there. I think he made some really, really interesting choices, and I do think they're quite strong in each format across what we see. And honestly, watching James play, I think he's a tight player.
Cool.
One thing I do want to mention, though, we do have Ricky and Justin in this pod.
Oh, that's the bragging rights.
Oh, boy, is that bragging rights.
Yeah, that's a
These
good
two have been biting at each other's heels. Who's going to win? Who's going to do better? Who's going to make it to top 8? It's pretty tight. It's going to be
Just this
sweet.
Wednesday at the store,
Yeah.
Ricky actually 2-0'd Brickman and said, "All right, here's my foreshadowing for you." Yeah.
I wish we could watch them get paired every round, just to put like a bow on that one. I'm done with you. James Bush is my pick. You guys pick Brickman. He's my second choice in the pod. I do like Bush's deck selections, as we talked about here. I think that's gonna treat him well, and I think he's metagamed the tournament appropriately. Moving along here to Pod C. I don't expect anything too flashy from anyone here, but Dakota, who do you have for Pod C?
If I picked Hoey to win the tournament, I have to pick him to win this pod, right?
Okay. Yep.
He's got, basically we've talked about this tournament for weeks leading up, right? And I think Hoey's strategy for these kinds of events is play the best deck and just outplay everybody else, and that's what he's basically brought to the table this weekend.
Yeah, definitely. Brad, who do you got?
Yeah, it's hard not to root for Matt. Not only is he a very skilled player, he's just a fantastic guy.
Yeah,
he
cool dude.
tells you exactly what he's thinking. He's very blunt, and some people might think that that's something to shy away from, but he's honest and he believes in people. He has a very optimistic attitude toward the game and toward players, and that's something to love. So as much as I want to root for him, though, I really
Here we go.
I really like Alexander Hamilton.
Okay.
If he plays tight, when he plays tight, he does very well.
Yeah.
He is kind of prone over the course of a long tournament to make some mistakes toward the later rounds.
Sure.
But if he can show up and if he's well prepared, I think he has a shot at this pod.
Cool. Joe?
Well, Matt Hoey is the name that I'm most familiar with in this pod, but I would also wouldn't be surprised to see Russell Wilson finish or at least proceed out of the group. He's a player who was unknown to me, but just playing Magic Online over the last few weeks, I've run into him a few times, and we actually talked a little bit, and
Nice.
I asked, are you happen to be a quarterback in Seattle? And he said, no, actually, but I am playing the Nerd Rage Championship, and so he's certainly putting in some time, and so I wouldn't be surprised to see him escape the group, although perhaps not on top of it.
Sure. For me, there's one Matt in the field. I have to pick the Matt. I pick Matt Hoey at every tournament. I think, Brad, when we start, I pick him at every single tournament. So
I mean, it's a good bet.
it's a decent shot. So I'm going to pick him to come out. Mac Endress is someone I like his deck selection again, and he won one of our CTs in Legacy, so he obviously knows what he's doing there.
Yeah.
Would not be surprised to see Mac Endress show up and take this pod down.
Which would be funny since Matt moved him into the pod.
Right.
How crazy would that be?
That would be cool,
That'd be sweet
yeah.
bragging rights, right? Like,
Yeah, I
you
mean-
put me here, this is what happens.
Absolutely.
That'd be great. For Pod D, I'll start that one off. This one is way up in the air as far as I'm concerned. It's the most up in the air of all the 3 pods, in my opinion. And there's some really weird stuff going on with deck selection here. We won't get into particulars. It's hard for me. You have Steve Locke as like your homer pick. I pick Keenan a lot. Keenan and I are really close, obviously. I'm not in love with his deck choices, but Keenan submitted his decks on Monday, so he was very confident. He didn't wait till the last second. He said, "Sign me up. This is what we're doing," which I think is kind of sweet because you gain extra time to play those decks if you want. You don't have to stress about what's my 75th card, what's my configuration for this and this. He was very set on what he was doing, so I think Keenan and Alex Javed are probably my 2 choices for this pod.
So if you're making your choice based on confidence and submitting their deck list early, does that mean that we made a mistake choosing Justin Brickman in Pod B, because Brickman took 3 attempts to even submit a legal deck list?
That's just the Justin Brickman thing, man. That's just the Brickman.
Well, look, if we're really going by that, Steve Locke had 30 seconds left to submit his
Legit.
deck.
11:59.
Legit 30 seconds. So for Pod D, Joe, who do you think in Pod D?
Well, I would like to see Reed Splett escape the group because, again, similar to in Pod A, we have the other player who is playing 3 decks that no one else in the field is touching. Andrew Tenjum is the player who's had the most success.
Yeah.
He actually, I believe, won a Grand Prix this year.
Sure did, yep.
2.
Okay.
One team event, yeah, right?
So he's done very well this year and in the past. So I mean, I would expect him to come out on top.
Cool. Dakota?
Yeah, pretty similar. This pod, I think more than the rest, is very like middle of the pack as far as its players. And then joining that middle of the pack is Andrew Tenjum. He has played in only a handful of championship trials for the NRG series this year, and he's top 16 or top 8 at I think every single one of them.
Yeah, very good. Yeah.
So a lot of consistency there. It's just pretty clear that he's going to, outside of some variants, outshine this pod in general.
Gotcha. Brad?
Yeah, I mean, I would typically say Tenjum as well. I do worry that his legacy deck is a little weak in this pod.
Sure.
But, you know, I think he'll manage to scrape out at least one match win in legacy.
Yeah, I think he could probably figure it out. If anyone's going to play with suboptimal decks against the field, I think Tenjum's definitely one of the people that I would choose is going to play well throughout the tournament, regardless of what he shows up with, right?
He is considered one of the better standard players
That's
in
true.
the last few
Absolutely.
years. So.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how that goes in Pod D. I think it's one that's, again, you said is not very top-heavy. It's kind of a bunch of middle of the pack, and we'll kind of see where that goes. Something that's unique about our tournament is the top 8 structure. So after these guys play the pods, obviously the winner of each pod advances. The second and third placing person in pods are going to cross-play, so they're going to play against each other to see who 5, 6, 7, and 8 are going into our top 8. Now for that, the top 8 structure is a little weird, Joe.
We'll also play, the top 4 will play around as well, or the winners of each pod will play around. Just
For seeding.
Or 2 rounds, right? For first, second, third, and fourth.
Right.
Yeah.
So kind of how the top 8 will work once we've made it through there into Sunday. The lowest seed, so if the 8 plays the 1, the 8 seed gets to veto a format. So standard, modern, or legacy. If they say, I'm not playing my legacy deck against you, they can veto that, and then the higher seed gets to choose one of the 2 remaining formats. So in this scenario, it would be standard or modern. And then they also get to pick whether they want to be on the play or the draw, which is pretty nuts, right? That's a huge advantage being on the play most of the time. And then you also get to pick your format of choice, sans 1, right? So, Joe, what do you think about that kind of structure? How's that affect things?
I think the primary effect is that as the commentators and you as viewers get to see, the idea is that you'll get to see the most competitive match.
Yeah.
Because assuming the players make smart decisions, the lower seed will veto the format where he has the worst matchup.
Mm-hmm.
And then the higher seed will effectively, he has the choice of 2, so he's effectively vetoing the matchup where he has the worst matchup.
Right.
And then we should have the most competitive match among the 3 potential as the one that's played out. So I'm looking forward to the top 8 and top 4 not just having high stakes and important matches, but also good matches.
Yeah, I agree. You wipe out the washouts, so if you're like combo versus mono green, you just done. I'm done with that. Done with that kind of thing. So it eliminates some of the variance, I think, which is kind of what you're alluding to, which is awesome. Kind of to wrap it up here, the biggest question of the day, right? Who's going to win the tournament? Brad, I think I know who you're going to say, but I'll let you tell everybody who you think's going to win.
It's Steve. I got to root for Steve. I'm his number 2 fan.
Wow, number one is his wife?
Number 1 is his wife.
Okay.
I was asking him last night. I was like, because he came up today.
Yep.
Actually, last night they drove up, but they're spending the day in Chicago. And his wife's going to come to the event. And I was like, oh, is she going to scout for you? And he's like, no, but she's my number 1 fan. So I don't get to be the number 1 fan, unfortunately.
That's too bad. I feel sorry for you. So you're taking Steve Locke. Joe, who you got?
I'm gonna go with Tommy Tomasevich.
Okay.
And I'm enamored with his deck choices, and so whether or not they're the best choices, they are. No one in the field is going to be prepared
Sure.
for what he brought
It's a big thing.
across the board, and so I'm that's my choice.
Tommy's your pick. All right, Dakota.
By the way, about Tommy, I mean, he's playing these unique choices, but they're decks that he knows inside and out. He's playing
Yeah.
Hardened Scales and Food Chain decks that he's played for years. So he knows how to play these decks very well. They just happen to be quote unquote rogue choices.
Sure.
As far as my choice for the winner of the event, I like a good underdog story, so I think we go with Blair Splett.
Okay.
I've been watching this kid play Magic since he was 12 years old, and seeing him on this series makes me extremely proud. I'm looking forward to basically watching him dance around these players all day long with
Cool.
his Drake decks and his Phoenix decks. Essentially, his presence at the table is something that I envy. He's extremely calm, he's extremely well posed, and I look forward to watching him play this weekend and taking it down.
Cool. Well, you guys are all wrong. Matt Hoey is going to win. He's going to repeat. All
right.
I'm going to take all the fun out of it now.
It's the Matt
You guys
Hoey
are-
series.
You guys are
All
very.
right.
You guys are very wrong.
Very original decision.
I appreciate you guys going out of the box and not picking Matt, but yeah, I'm just going to choose Matt. I mean, he's one of the guys that just plays tier 1 deck, plays it very well.
Right.
He's having a very good year.
Just
Not just in
incredible
this
year.
series.
Yeah, so I think Matt is obviously my choice. All right, everybody, with all of our expert analysis, if you can call it that, we're going to get out of here for now. We're going to see you in just a few minutes. We're going to get our players situated. We're going to kick off round 1 of our championship in just a few.